The sun had just begun to set over the bustling streets of New York City, casting long shadows across the sidewalks and bathing everything in a warm orange glow. People hurried past the towering buildings, some heading home after a long day of work, others stepping out to enjoy the night. Among them was Evelyn Carter, an elderly black woman whose presence seemed to carry a quiet strength despite her age. She walked with deliberate steps, her back straight and her head held high, clutching a small suitcase that contained all she needed for the evening ahead. Evelyn had traveled far that day, not because of any grand adventure or urgent business, but simply because she wanted to experience something familiar yet special, a stay at one of her own hotels. Though few people knew it, Evelyn owned the entire chain of luxury hotels scattered across the country. To most, she was just another guest, someone who might blend into the background if not for the grace and dignity she exuded wherever she went. Tonight, however, she wasn't here as the CEO, she was here as herself, hoping to find comfort and relaxation in a place she had built with her own hands. As she approached the entrance of the hotel, its grand facade loomed before her like a palace frozen in time. The building was breathtaking, with gleaming glass doors framed by ornate gold, accents and rows of perfectly manicured plants lining the walkway. Inside, the lobby stretched wide and open, filled with plush furniture, sparkling chandeliers, and the faint hum of conversations drifting through the air. It was exactly the kind of place Evelyn loved, elegant, welcoming, and alive with possibility. But tonight it would become the stage for an encounter she hadn't anticipated. Evelyn stepped inside, letting the cool, air-conditioned breeze wash over her. For a moment, she paused to take it all in, the polished marble floors reflecting, the soft light above, the gentle clinking of glasses from the bar area, and the steady flow of guests moving about their evenings. Then, with purpose, she made her way toward the front desk. This was where her journey would begin, though she didn't yet know how much it would change her perspective on the very world she had created. Behind the front desk stood Kyle Davidson, a young man in his mid-20s with neatly styled hair and a crisp uniform that matched the hotel's pristine aesthetic. On paper, Kyle seemed like the perfect employee, punctual, polite, and eager to please. Yet beneath his professional exterior lay a streak of arrogance, fueled by assumptions he often made about the people around him. He glanced up briefly as Evelyn approached, his lips curling into what could only be described as a forced smile. "Good evening," Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that invited kindness in return. "I'd like to check in, please." Kyle nodded, barely looking at her as he reached for the computer screen in front of him. His gaze flickered over her outfit, a simple yet tasteful blouse paired with a knee-length skirt, and lingered on the modest suitcase she carried. In that split second, a decision formed in his mind. Without even checking the system, he assumed she couldn't possibly afford a room here. After all, why would someone dressed so plainly choose such an extravagant place? "I'm sorry," Kyle replied, his tone clipped and dismissive. "We're fully booked tonight." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the abruptness of his response. She leaned slightly closer, her brow furrowing ever so subtly. "Are you certain? I don't have a reservation, but I thought perhaps there might still be availability." Kyle shook his head, already turning his attention back to the monitor as if dismissing her entirely. "No, ma'am, we're completely full. You'll need to try somewhere else." His words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Evelyn felt a pang of disappointment, not because of the refusal itself, but because of the way it was delivered. There was no apology, no effort to soften the blow, just a curt dismissal, as though her presence inconvenienced him somehow. Still, she refused to let it show on her face. Years of navigating a world that often underestimated her had taught her how to mask her emotions when necessary. "Thank you," she said evenly, her voice betraying none of the hurt she felt. With that, she turned and began walking away, her footsteps echoing faintly against the marble floor. As she exited the hotel, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her, Evelyn allowed herself a deep sigh. The city buzzed around her, indifferent to what had just transpired. She glanced back once at the glowing sign above the entrance, feeling a strange mix of sadness and resolve settle over her. Back inside the lobby, Kyle barely gave the incident a second thought. He returned to scrolling through his phone, confident that he had done the right thing. Guests like that, he reasoned, didn't belong in a place like this. What he didn't realize was that his actions had set off a chain of events that would ripple far beyond the confines of the hotel. Unbeknownst to him, Evelyn Carter wasn't just any guest. She was the architect of the empire he worked for, the person whose vision and hard work had brought this hotel, and countless others like it, to life. Meanwhile, Evelyn hailed a taxi and instructed the driver to take her to a nearby cafe. Sitting in the back seat, she stared out the window at the city lights blurring together in streaks of yellow and red. Her mind replayed the interaction with Kyle, dissecting every word and gesture. While part of her understood that prejudice was deeply ingrained in society, another part couldn't help but feel disheartened. Here she was, a woman who had overcome countless obstacles to build a legacy, only to be turned away from her own creation because of someone else's narrow-mindedness. But Evelyn was no stranger to adversity. Throughout her life, she had faced discrimination in various forms, from being denied opportunities due to her race to having her ideas dismissed simply because of her gender. Each challenge had only strengthened her resolve, pushing her to prove doubters wrong and carve out a space for herself in a world that often tried to keep her down. And now, sitting in that taxi, she decided that this incident would be no different. If anything, it would serve as a reminder of why she had started this journey in the first place, to create spaces where everyone, regardless of background, could feel valued and respected. Little did Kyle or anyone else at the hotel know, their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't imagine. Evelyn Carter was not the kind of woman to let injustice go unnoticed or unaddressed. Over the next few days, the hotel staff would come to learn exactly who she was and, more importantly, what she stood for. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the same hotel where she had been turned away the previous evening. But this time, she wasn't alone. Accompanying her was Rachel Monroe, a sharp and ambitious regional manager who had worked closely with Evelyn for years. Rachel was known for her ability to navigate complex situations with tact and precision, qualities that made her one of Evelyn's most trusted advisors. Together, they entered through the same grand doors that had seemed so welcoming just hours before but now carried a weight of irony. Rachel glanced at Evelyn as they walked side by side, noting the quiet determination etched into her features. Though Evelyn rarely showed anger or frustration, Rachel could sense the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. She knew better than anyone how deeply Evelyn valued fairness and respect, not just as principles, but as cornerstones of the business empire she had built from scratch. This incident wasn't just personal, it struck at the heart of what Evelyn stood for. They headed straight to one of the hotel's conference rooms, where a high-profile meeting was already underway. Corporate executives from various branches of the hotel chain had gathered to discuss recent challenges facing the company. Revenue growth had slowed in certain regions, customer satisfaction ratings were slipping, and competition was fiercer than ever. The mood in the room was tense, with voices rising and falling like waves as arguments unfolded over spreadsheets and projections. When Evelyn and Rachel entered, the room fell silent almost instantly. All eyes turned toward them, and for a moment no one spoke. Evelyn's presence commanded attention without effort. Dressed in a simple yet elegant blouse, she carried herself with the kind of authority that couldn't be faked or bought. It came from decades of hard work, resilience, and unwavering integrity. As she took her seat at the head of the table, Rachel handed her a folder containing key updates on the company's performance. "Thank you all for being here," Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. "We have much to address today, but I want to start by emphasizing something very important. Our success as a company doesn't come from our buildings or our amenities. It comes from the way we treat people. Every guest who walks through our doors should feel valued, respected, and welcome. That's not just good business, it's the right thing to do." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with some and making others shift uncomfortably in their seats. Evelyn paused, letting the message sink in before continuing. "Unfortunately, I've recently encountered a situation that makes me question whether we're living up to those values. And if we aren't, then we need to fix it, quickly." Rachel watched as confusion rippled across the faces of the executives. None of them seemed to know what Evelyn was referring to, except for her. Earlier that morning, Rachel had discreetly informed Evelyn about the incident involving Kyle, the receptionist. She had hesitated to bring it up initially, unsure of how Evelyn might react. But Evelyn had listened intently, her expression unreadable, and simply nodded when Rachel finished speaking. After wrapping up the main points of the meeting, Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair, folding her hands on the table in front of her. "Before we conclude," she said, turning to Rachel, "there's something else I'd like to share." Rachel nodded, signaling that she was ready to step in if needed. Evelyn cleared her throat gently and continued. "Last night I visited this very hotel as a guest. I didn't announce my arrival or request special treatment. I simply wanted to experience firsthand what our guests go through when they check in. Unfortunately, I was met with less than ideal service." She paused again, allowing the weight of her statement to settle over the room. Whispers broke out among the executives, their curiosity piqued. Some exchanged puzzled glances, while others looked genuinely concerned. Evelyn waited patiently until the murmurs subsided before explaining further. "At the front desk, I was told that the hotel was fully booked, even though I know for a fact that there were available rooms. When I pressed the matter, I was dismissed, outright, without any attempt to verify the information or offer assistance. Now, I understand that mistakes happen, and I'm not here to point fingers indiscriminately. However, what troubles me most is the underlying attitude behind this interaction. It suggests a lack of inclusivity and respect, values that are supposed to define our brand." As Evelyn spoke, her tone remained measured and composed, but there was no mistaking the seriousness of her words. The executives sat frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment. None of them dared interrupt her as she recounted the details of the encounter, painting a vivid picture of how poorly she had been treated. Rachel observed the reactions carefully, noting which individuals seemed genuinely remorseful and which appeared defensive or dismissive. She knew that Evelyn would expect accountability, not excuses, and she prepared herself to assist in whatever actions followed. Once Evelyn finished speaking, she turned to Greg Miller, the hotel's manager, who had been sitting quietly near the end of the table. Greg was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a perpetually harried expression. He prided himself on running a tight ship, but he also tended to avoid conflict whenever possible. Now, however, there was no escaping the spotlight. "Greg," Evelyn said, fixing him with a piercing gaze, "I trust you'll look into this matter thoroughly and ensure it doesn't happen again. I expect a full report on what went wrong and how we can prevent similar incidents in the future." Greg swallowed hard, his face flushing red as he stammered out an apology. "Ms. Carter, I had no idea this happened. Please believe me when I say it's unacceptable, and I'll get to the bottom of it immediately." Evelyn nodded curtly, accepting his promise for now. "Good. Because let me make one thing perfectly clear. Discrimination has no place in my organization. Not now, not ever. If anyone working under you or under anyone else in this room fails to uphold our standards, they will answer for it. Do I make myself clear?" The executives nodded in unison, their faces pale but resolute. They understood the gravity of the situation and the potential consequences if word of this got out. Evelyn's reputation as a fair but firm leader preceded her, and no one wanted to risk crossing her. After the meeting adjourned, Rachel accompanied Evelyn back to her office, a spacious penthouse suite located on the top floor of the hotel. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the entirety of Manhattan spread out below them, a glittering tapestry of lights and life. Despite the breathtaking view, neither woman paid much attention to it. Their minds were focused squarely on the task ahead. "You handled that beautifully," Rachel remarked, breaking the silence. "But are you sure you don't want to take a more direct approach? Maybe meet with the staff yourself?" Evelyn shook her head thoughtfully. "Not yet. Let Greg handle the initial investigation. He needs to understand the seriousness of this issue firsthand. Besides, sometimes the best lessons come from confronting your own mistakes. Rachel smiled faintly, admiring Evelyn's wisdom as always. Still, I can't help but wonder how the receptionist will react when he finds out who you really are. Evelyn chuckled softly, a rare glimpse of amusement crossing her face. Oh, I imagine he'll be quite surprised, and perhaps a little humbled. But we'll see. For now, let's focus on ensuring this never happens again. As the two women discuss strategies for improving diversity training and fostering a culture of inclusivity, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the city. Outside, life continued as usual, oblivious to the seismic shifts happening within the walls of the hotel. Inside, however, change was already underway, and Evelyn Carter was leading the charge. The following morning, Evelyn returned to the hotel lobby, this time accompanied not only by Rachel Monroe but also by two senior executives from the corporate office. Their presence was deliberate, a show of strength and seriousness that signaled this visit was far from ordinary. As they stepped inside, the grandeur of the hotel once again surrounded them, gleaming marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and the soft hum of conversations filling the space. But beneath the surface beauty, there was an undeniable undercurrent of unease. Evelyn moved with purpose, her steps steady and unhurried. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence she always did, but today her demeanor held an edge, a subtle reminder that she was here not as a guest, but as the CEO. Rachel walked beside her, clutching a tablet filled with notes and reports, while the two executives trailed slightly behind, their expressions unreadable but alert. At the front desk, Kyle Davidson stood frozen, his eyes widening as he recognized Evelyn from the previous day. His heart sank the moment he saw her approach, flanked by such an intimidating entourage. He had no idea what was about to unfold, but instinct told him it wasn't going to be good. For a fleeting second, he considered ducking into the back room to avoid confrontation. But before he could act, Evelyn was already speaking. "I'd like to speak with the manager on duty," she said, her voice firm yet polite. There was no trace of anger or hostility in her tone, but the authority behind her words left no room for argument. Kyle fumbled for a response, stammering something incoherent before calling over Greg Miller, the hotel manager. Greg arrived within moments, his usual harried expression replaced by one of confusion and apprehension. He hadn't been briefed on why Evelyn was back, but seeing her accompanied by high-level executives made it clear this wasn't a casual visit. "Ms. Carter?" Greg asked cautiously, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn turned to face him, her gaze piercing yet composed. "Greg, I believe you know who I am. If not, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Evelyn Carter, the CEO of this hotel chain." She paused, allowing the weight of her statement to sink in. Greg's jaw dropped slightly and he instinctively straightened his posture, suddenly aware of how dire the situation might be. Rachel stepped forward then, holding out her tablet. "Ms. Carter has some concerns regarding recent events at this location, specifically an incident involving your front desk staff." Greg blinked rapidly, his mind racing to piece together what they were referring to. Then it hit him, the complaint Evelyn had mentioned during yesterday's meeting. The pieces fell into place and his face flushed red with embarrassment. Oh dear," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "Please, allow me to apologize. I assure you, we'll get to the bottom of this right away." Evelyn raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. "There's no need for empty apologies just yet. What I want is accountability. Tell me, Greg, do you recognize this individual?" She gestured toward Kyle, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Greg glanced at Kyle, then back at Evelyn, nodding hesitantly. "Yes, that's Kyle Davidson. He's one of our receptionists." Evelyn nodded, her expression remaining neutral. "Good. Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Davidson felt it appropriate to turn me away when I attempted to check in last night. Despite available rooms, I was told the hotel was fully booked and dismissed without further inquiry." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his face pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. Greg stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he managed to choke out, "Kyle, is this true?" Kyle swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to find the words. I thought," he began, his voice trembling. I didn't think." "You didn't think," Evelyn interrupted, her tone cutting through his stuttering. "That's precisely the problem, isn't it? You made assumptions based on appearances rather than facts. And in doing so, you failed to treat a guest, any guest, with the respect and dignity they deserve." Kyle hung his head, unable to meet Evelyn's gaze. The truth was written all over his face. Guilt, shame, and regret. He hadn't intended to cause harm. He had simply acted on autopilot, letting prejudice guide his actions. Now, faced with the consequences, he felt utterly exposed. Greg cleared, his throat awkwardly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Ms. Carter, please accept my sincerest apologies on behalf of everyone here. This behavior is unacceptable, and we'll take immediate action to address it. Kyle will be disciplined accordingly, and we'll review our training protocols to ensure this doesn't happen again." Evelyn studied Greg carefully, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she spoke. "Discipline alone won't solve the root of the problem. This isn't just about one employee. It's about fostering a culture of inclusivity and respect throughout the entire organization. I expect a full investigation into this matter, along with concrete steps to prevent future incidents. Do I make myself clear?" Greg nodded vigorously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Crystal clear, Ms. Carter. You have my word." With that, Evelyn turned her attention back to Kyle. She regarded him quietly for a moment, her gaze neither harsh nor forgiving. Instead, it was thoughtful, almost contemplative. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Davidson, I imagine you've realized by now that I'm not just another guest. But even if I were, does that change how you should have treated me?" Kyle shook his head quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, ma'am. It doesn't." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Good. Because every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with fairness and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from. That's the standard I expect from everyone who represents this company. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Kyle replied, his voice cracking under the weight of his remorse. "I'm so sorry." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she exchanged a glance with Rachel, who gave a slight nod of approval. Turning back to Greg, she said, "I'll await your report on this matter. In the meantime, consider this a wake-up call, not just for this hotel but for the entire chain. We have work to do." As Evelyn and her team turned to leave, the atmosphere in the lobby remained heavy with tension. Kyle watched them go, his hands trembling as he replayed the encounter in his mind. He knew he had messed up badly, and now he would have to face the repercussions. But deep down, he also sensed an opportunity. Maybe, just maybe, this could be a chance to learn, grow, and prove himself worthy of redemption. Outside, Evelyn climbed into a waiting car, her expression thoughtful as the city blurred past the windows. Rachel sat beside her, glancing over at her mentor. "Do you think he'll change?" she asked softly. Evelyn sighed, her gaze distant. People often reveal their true character when faced with mistakes. Whether he chooses to learn from this experience is up to him. All we can do is lead by example and hope others follow. And with that, the car sped off, leaving behind a hotel forever changed by the power of accountability and the unwavering pursuit of justice. Later that evening, Evelyn found herself back in her penthouse office atop one of Manhattan's tallest buildings. The view was breathtaking as always, a sprawling canvas of twinkling lights stretching far into the horizon. But tonight, Evelyn barely noticed it. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the past 2 days over and over again like a film reel stuck on repeat. Rachel sat across from her, perched on the edge of a comfortable armchair. She had been silent for most of their time together, sensing that Evelyn needed space to process everything. But now, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the room grew dimmer, Rachel decided it was time to speak. "You handled yourself beautifully today," Rachel said softly, breaking the silence. "I know how difficult situations like this can be, not just professionally, but personally." Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the city outside. "It's never easy," she admitted after a moment. "No matter how many times I face prejudice or discrimination, it always stings. It reminds me of all the battles I've fought and all the ones still left to fight." Rachel leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "You've done so much already, Evelyn. You've built an empire, shattered barriers, and inspired countless people along the way. But moments like these, they must feel like setbacks." "They do," Evelyn replied, turning to look at Rachel for the first time since they had arrived. "But they're also reminders of why I started this journey in the first place. Growing up, I faced so many doors slammed in my face, literally and figuratively. I learned early on that success wouldn't come easily, especially as a black woman in a world that often didn't see me as equal. But instead of letting those rejections break me, I used them as fuel. Every no pushed me closer to building something where everyone could feel welcome." Rachel listened intently, her admiration for Evelyn growing even stronger. She knew parts of Evelyn's story, how she had risen from humble beginnings in a small southern town to become one of the most influential figures in the hospitality industry. But hearing her talk about it firsthand was different. There was a raw honesty in her words, a vulnerability that few ever got to witness. "Do you remember when I first came to work for you?" Rachel asked, smiling faintly. "I was so intimidated by your reputation. Everyone said you were tough but fair, and I was terrified of making a mistake." Evelyn chuckled softly, the corners of her mouth lifting into a rare smile. "And yet, here you are years later, sitting across from me as one of my most trusted advisors. Funny how things turn out, isn't it?" "It's because of you," Rachel said sincerely. "You taught me that leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. And yesterday, watching you confront that receptionist and his manager, it reminded me of everything I admire about you." Evelyn's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more somber expression. "It's not about admiration, Rachel. It's about accountability. What happened at that hotel wasn't just about me. It was about every guest who walks through our doors. If we don't hold ourselves to the highest standards, then we're failing them. That's why I couldn't let this go unnoticed." Rachel nodded, understanding completely. "Still, I can't help but wonder how Kyle will handle this. Do you think he'll learn from his mistake?" Evelyn sighed, leaning back against the couch cushions. "That's the question, isn't it? People reveal their true character when faced with consequences. Some crumble under the weight of guilt, others rise to the occasion and grow. I suppose only time will tell which path Kyle chooses." Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Kyle Davidson was grappling with exactly that dilemma. After Evelyn and her team had left earlier that day, Greg Miller called him into a private meeting room to discuss what had happened. The conversation hadn't gone well, at least not for Kyle. Greg laid into him with a mix of frustration and disappointment, making it abundantly clear that his actions had jeopardized not only his own job, but the hotel's reputation as well. "You're lucky she didn't fire you on the spot," Greg snapped, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Do you have any idea who Evelyn Carter is? She's not just some random guest, she owns this entire chain. And you treated her like, I know." Kyle interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up. I get it." Greg stopped pacing and turned to glare at him. "Messing up doesn't even begin to cover it. You embarrassed this hotel, insulted the CEO, and reinforced stereotypes that we've worked so hard to dismantle. If I were you, I'd start preparing my resume." The threat hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Kyle felt his stomach churn, a mixture of fear and shame washing over him. He had always prided himself on being good at his job, or at least competent enough to avoid trouble. But now, faced with the reality of what he'd done, he realized just how complacent he had become. His assumptions, his biases, they weren't harmless quirks or minor flaws. They were dangerous habits that had real-world consequences. Over the next few days, Kyle attended mandatory training sessions on diversity and inclusion, led by corporate trainers flown in specifically to address the incident. At first, he resented having to sit through lectures and workshops, feeling like he was being singled out unfairly. But as the sessions progressed, something shifted inside him. Hearing stories from other employees about their experiences with prejudice opened his eyes to a world he had never truly understood before. One session in particular stood out. A senior executive shared a personal story about being denied service at a restaurant because of her race. Her voice cracked as she recounted the humiliation she had felt, the anger boiling beneath the surface. Kyle listened silently, his chest tightening with each word. For the first time, he began to see the impact of his actions, not just on Evelyn, but on countless others who had likely walked away from the hotel feeling dismissed and devalued. By the end of the week, Kyle found himself reflecting deeply on his behavior. He realized that his assumptions weren't just lazy or careless, they were harmful. They perpetuated a cycle of exclusion and inequality that he had unwittingly contributed to. Determined to make amends, he requested a private meeting with Evelyn, hoping to apologize directly and seek forgiveness. When the day finally came, Kyle stood nervously outside Evelyn's office, rehearsing what he would say in his head. He knew there were no guarantees. She might refuse to see him altogether. But he owed it to her, to himself, and to the values he now wanted to embody to try. Taking a deep breath, Kyle knocked lightly on the door, bracing himself for whatever came next. Little did he know, this encounter would mark the beginning of a journey toward redemption, not just for him, but for the entire organization. As Evelyn prepared to meet with Kyle, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Accountability was the first step toward change, and if Kyle was willing to take responsibility for his actions, then perhaps there was a chance for growth after all. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Evelyn had always believed in the power of second chances, and in the possibility of transforming mistakes into lessons that lasted a lifetime. The clock ticked softly in the background as Kyle Davidson stood outside Evelyn Carter's office door, his heart pounding like a drum. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say countless times during the cab ride over, but now that he was here, all those carefully chosen words seemed to evaporate from his mind. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself why he had come: to apologize, to take responsibility, and to prove that he could change. With trembling fingers, Kyle knocked lightly on the door. A moment later, Evelyn's voice called out, clear and composed, "Come in." Pushing the door open, Kyle stepped inside, feeling every eye in the room, if only imagined, on him. Evelyn sat behind her desk, her posture relaxed but commanding. Her gaze met his, and though it wasn't harsh or judgmental, Kyle felt its weight immediately. It was the kind of look that saw straight through excuses and pretenses, demanding honesty instead. "Ms. Carter," Kyle began, his voice shaky but earnest. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I don't deserve your time after what happened, but I wanted to apologize directly. What I did, it was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Evelyn studied him quietly for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, she gestured for him to sit down across from her. Kyle hesitated briefly before lowering himself into the chair, his hands gripping the armrests tightly as if bracing for impact. "I appreciate your willingness to come here today," Evelyn said finally, her tone measured and calm. "But apologies are easy. Anyone can say they're sorry. What matters is whether you mean it, and whether you're willing to do the work to ensure it doesn't happen again." Kyle nodded vigorously, leaning forward slightly. "I do mean it, Ms. Carter. I've spent the last week reflecting on what I did, and I realize now how much harm my actions caused, not just to you, but to everyone who might have walked away from our hotel feeling unwelcome because of people like me. I let my assumptions get in the way, and I failed to treat you with the respect you deserved." Evelyn listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. There was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet intensity that made Kyle feel both exposed and understood. When he finished speaking, she leaned back in her chair, folding her hands neatly on the desk in front of her. "Tell me, Kyle, she said gently. What have you learned from this experience? Kyle took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I've learned that my assumptions aren't harmless, they're damaging. They reinforce stereotypes and create barriers where there shouldn't be any. I also learned that treating someone with dignity and respect isn't negotiable. It's not something we reserve for certain guests. It's something we owe to everyone, no matter who they are or what they look like. Evelyn nodded slowly, a faint glimmer of approval flickering in her eyes. That's a good start, she said, but learning is only part of the process. The real test comes in how you apply those lessons moving forward. Are you ready to put in the effort to change, not just for yourself, but for others? Yes, ma'am, Kyle replied without hesitation. I want to make things right. I'll do whatever it takes. For the first time since their meeting began, Evelyn's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Good. Because I believe in second chances, for those who earn them. And I think you have the potential to grow from this experience, if you're willing to commit to it. Over the next hour, Evelyn outlined a plan for Kyle's redemption. She assigned him to lead a new initiative aimed at improving guest experiences across all properties in the chain. This wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. Kyle would collaborate with employees and guests alike to identify areas where inclusivity and respect could be strengthened. His role would involve conducting interviews, organizing workshops, and developing strategies to foster a culture of empathy and understanding within the organization. At first, Kyle felt overwhelmed by the scope of the project, but as Evelyn explained her vision, he began to see it not as a burden but as a chance to make amends. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, he could turn this mistake into something meaningful. Later, that evening, Kyle returned home, his mind buzzing with ideas and possibilities. He sat at his kitchen table, pulling out a notebook and jotting down thoughts about how to approach the initiative. As he wrote, he realized how much he still had to learn, not just about hospitality, but about humanity itself. Each word he scribbled felt like a step toward becoming someone better, someone worthy of Evelyn's trust. Meanwhile, Evelyn reflected on the meeting from the comfort of her penthouse office. Rachel joined her shortly after Kyle left, curious to hear how it had gone. So? Rachel asked, settling into the chair opposite Evelyn. What did you think? Evelyn sighed softly, her gaze drifting toward the city lights outside. He's sincere, she said after a moment. I can tell he feels genuine remorse and he seems committed to making a change. Whether he follows through remains to be seen, but I believe he has the potential to grow. Rachel smiled faintly, impressed by Evelyn's ability to balance compassion with accountability. You didn't have to give him another chance, she pointed out. Most people in your position wouldn't have bothered. Perhaps not, Evelyn agreed. But leadership isn't just about holding people accountable. It's about giving them the tools to succeed. If Kyle truly wants to change, then it's my responsibility to help him along that path. Besides, forgiveness isn't just for his benefit, it's for ours too. Holding on to resentment only weighs us down. Rachel nodded, moved by Evelyn's wisdom. You always find a way to inspire people, even when they least expect it. Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head. It's not about inspiration, Rachel, it's about action. Words are meaningless unless they're backed by deeds. And now, thanks to Kyle's mistake, we have an opportunity to strengthen our values and improve the lives of everyone who walks through our doors. As the night wore on, Evelyn turned her attention back to the city below, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Every setback carried within it the seeds of progress, and this incident was no exception. By addressing it head-on, she had not only held her team accountable but also reinforced the principles that defined her company: inclusivity, respect, and fairness. In the weeks that followed, Kyle threw himself into the initiative with unmatched determination. He reached out to colleagues, seeking their input and advice. He spoke with guests, listening to their stories and learning firsthand about the challenges they faced. Slowly but surely, He began to rebuild the trust he had lost, not just from Evelyn but from his coworkers as well. Back at the corporate office, Evelyn kept a close eye on Kyle's progress, offering guidance when needed, but otherwise allowing him the freedom to lead. She knew that true growth came from taking ownership of one's mistakes, and she was determined to give Kyle the space to prove himself. By the end of the month, the early results of Kyle's efforts were promising. Employee morale improved. Guest satisfaction ratings climbed, and the hotel staff began to embrace a more inclusive mindset. While there was still work to be done, the foundation for lasting change had been laid. As Evelyn watched these developments unfold, she couldn't help but feel proud, not just of Kyle but of the entire organization. Mistakes had been made, yes, but they had become catalysts for transformation. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Turning adversity into opportunity, and using every challenge as a stepping stone toward a brighter future. Months had passed since Evelyn Carter walked into the hotel lobby as an unassuming guest and left as a catalyst for change. The incident that began with prejudice had sparked a movement within the company, a renewed commitment to inclusivity, respect, and excellence. Now, the hotel hosted a grand gala to celebrate not only its restored reputation, but also the strides it had made toward becoming a beacon of hospitality and equality. The ballroom buzzed with energy as guests arrived, their laughter and conversations blending seamlessly with the soft strains of live music. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the space, reflecting off polished tables adorned with elegant floral centerpieces. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd, offering flutes of champagne and hors d'oeuvres to the attendees. Among them were corporate executives, loyal customers, community leaders, and employees from all levels of the organization. What made this evening unique was the diversity of faces, people of different races, ages, and backgrounds coming together, under one roof, united by shared values. Evelyn stood near the stage, watching the festivities unfold with quiet satisfaction. She wore a simple yet sophisticated gown, her presence commanding attention without effort. Beside her, Rachel Monroe beamed with pride, occasionally leaning in to share observations about the night. Together, they represented the heart and soul of the company, a legacy built on resilience, vision, and compassion. As the clock struck 8, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the program. A young woman approached the microphone to introduce Evelyn, her voice filled with admiration as she spoke about the CEO's leadership and dedication to creating a better world. When Evelyn finally stepped onto the stage, the room erupted into applause. She paused for a moment, taking in the sight of so many smiling faces before lifting her hands to quiet the crowd. "Thank you," Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for being here tonight, not just to celebrate our achievements, but to honor the journey that brought us here. This hotel, like every other property in our chain, exists for one purpose: to provide a home away from home for anyone who walks through our doors. But achieving that goal requires more than beautiful buildings and luxurious amenities. It requires a culture of kindness, empathy, and respect." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning nods of agreement and murmurs of appreciation. Evelyn continued, her tone reflective yet passionate. "A few months ago, we faced a challenge that forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. We discovered that even within our own walls, there were gaps in how we treated our guests. That realization was painful, but it was also an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become better than we were before." She paused, scanning the room as if making eye contact with each individual. "Tonight, I want to acknowledge the hard work and determination of everyone who contributed to this transformation. From our frontline staff to our corporate leaders, you have shown what it means to embrace accountability and strive for excellence. And while we still have much to accomplish, I am proud of how far we've come." Evelyn then turned her attention to Kyle Davidson, who sat at a table near the front of the room. He looked up, startled when she mentioned his name. "I'd like to recognize someone in particular," she said, gesturing toward him. "Kyle has demonstrated incredible growth over the past few months. His willingness to take responsibility for his actions and his efforts to lead positive change have inspired us all." Let us give him a round of applause. The room erupted into cheers, and Kyle rose from his seat, visibly moved. He bowed his head humbly, his eyes glistening with gratitude. For someone who had once been consumed by shame and regret, this moment felt like redemption. As he returned to his seat, he exchanged a glance with Evelyn, silently thanking her for believing in him. After concluding her speech, Evelyn stepped down from the stage to join Rachel and the rest of the team. The celebration continued late into the night, with guests dancing, sharing stories, and enjoying the festivities. Yet amidst the joy, there was a palpable sense of purpose, an understanding that this was more than just a party. It was a milestone in the ongoing pursuit of equality and fairness. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Evelyn found herself standing alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air brushed against her skin, and the distant hum of traffic provided a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. Rachel joined her shortly after, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "You did it," Rachel said softly, handing one of the glasses to Evelyn. "This night wouldn't have been possible without you." Evelyn smiled faintly, raising her glass in a silent toast. "We did it," she corrected. "Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when everyone works together. Tonight proves that." Rachel nodded, sipping her drink as she gazed out at the skyline. "Do you think we'll ever reach a point where discrimination is truly a thing of the past?" Evelyn considered the question thoughtfully, her gaze distant. "I don't know if we'll ever eliminate prejudice completely. Human beings are flawed and mistakes will always be made. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Progress isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. As long as we keep striving to do better, we'll continue moving forward." The 2 women stood in companionable silence, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken and the road ahead. Evelyn knew that challenges would arise again. There would always be obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that adversity could be transformed into opportunity, and setbacks into stepping stones. As the clock struck midnight, Evelyn turned to Rachel with a small smile. "Let's call it a night," she said. "Tomorrow is a new day, and there's still so much work to be done." With that, they made their way back inside, leaving behind the glittering lights of the city. Evelyn climbed into her car, ready to return to her penthouse office and prepare for the next chapter. Though the gala marked a significant achievement, it was merely one step in a lifelong mission to create a world where everyone felt seen, valued, and respected. And as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She had faced adversity, confronted injustice, and emerged stronger than ever. Her legacy was no longer just about hotels. It was about hope, resilience, and the belief that true change began with treating others as equals. One act of kindness at a time, she was shaping a brighter future, one that would endure long after she was gone.